I'm Katie Bennett-Stenton, a dual Australian US citizen and the National Marketing Lead for Energy Resources and Industrials with Deloitte in Australia. I'm fortunate enough to be spending 2 exciting months in our Chicago office while I put my kids into school and finalise their US citizenship. And I'm really delighted to have the opportunity to spend time with a number of our global experts, thinkers and leaders. I'm currently immersing myself in a different culture within a much larger team, and I'm excited about the insights and learnings. Throughout this time, I'm speaking to different leaders and sharing thought-provoking, relevant and influential takeaways. Today, I'm delighted to be speaking with Marlene Motyka, who is Deloitte's US and Global Renewable Energy Leader. Marlene, great to speak to you today.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. I'm happy to join you.
I'm interested, just before we get into the questions that we talked about earlier, if you could tell listeners a little bit about your background, which is really interesting. I think it's always much more interesting to hear directly from the person rather than me read your bio.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Happy to provide just some of that background. I've grown up in the Northeast of the United States and lived in the Northeast United States my entire life. But I've had the opportunity to travel tremendously, and I'll get into that. But I have a mechanical engineering undergraduate degree and worked for a few years in engineering, and that's where I actually had my first exposure to the power industry. I was working for an architectural engineering firm that was doing some design work at power plants and actually even paper product manufacturing facilities. But then I moved from there to a job with our local, New Jersey local transportation authority for trains, et cetera. But after 2 different jobs in engineering, I decided it wasn't for me and went back to school and got my MBA in finance. And then I started with Deloitte after that. So I'm coming up on 23 years at Deloitte, all of that in the valuation practice. But over time, the work I've done, who I've worked for, has changed tremendously, and obviously the leadership opportunities I had. So I originally started doing work, valuing assets internationally for cross-border lease transactions, which were allowed under the US IRS regulations. So I had been to Australia and New Zealand. I've been to Japan, all over Europe. I've been to the Netherlands 30 times, and it was all fabulous. And then the IRS shut that regulation down and was no longer able to do that work. So I started doing work in the US, focusing on power and utilities. And then about 12 years ago, I got into renewable energy, and it's increasingly become a larger part of my business. And actually, it's most of what I do today is renewable energy, and have had the opportunity to, about 10 years ago, become the U.S. renewable energy leader, and then most recently Deloitte's global renewable energy leader, which has been fantastic.
What an interesting background, and I think certainly a really poignant lesson in terms of needing to be agile and pivot away
Yes.
from what was your bread and butter for quite a while.
Yeah. Exactly. Things are always changing, which makes life exciting. I mean, the base of what I do, is pretty much the same, but who I do it with, why I'm doing it, the assets that I'm covering when I'm doing that work has changed over time. So it's been really interesting.
Well, and it's such a fascinating space. Deloitte Australia is sponsoring the Australian Financial Review Energy Summit in Sydney next week, and we're releasing a paper there around looking at a number of different scenarios as to how organisations can move to being carbon neutral. And it's just changing and evolving on a sort of weekly or daily basis. So
exactly, exactly.
It's a fascinating topic.
Yeah.
So Marlene, we might get into the questions. You talked a little bit about some of the travel that you've done and a huge amount of time that you've spent in the Netherlands. And I'm interested to understand a little bit more about how your life and your career improves as a result of being better connected with people across the globe.
So, as I mentioned, I started traveling internationally when I first started at Deloitte, and I never expected to do as much travel as I did. But, it was fascinating. I met so many different people. I went to, in some cases, very small communities and towns. And, one time we were dealing with a CEO of a utility in the Netherlands. He brought us to his in-laws' house where they had a very old windmill, like an old traditional windmill that was still grinding grain and had been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. And then they fed us apples from their apple orchards. So I was able to really see things that I think even most tourists aren't able to see. But I think what you learn from that is being able to deal with and understand different styles that people have, different personalities, different cultures. It's also important. And even if you're, in the U.S. and you work in the U.S., you're dealing with different cultures and different personalities because things are becoming so global. So I think it really opens you up to thinking about how people look at things differently, how they may deal with a situation differently. And diversity, brings us stronger, whether it's, diversity of age or religion or, what your heritage is. So I think it's great. And I just always use it as a learning opportunity. And when I became the global renewable energy leader, what's interesting is I can't be an expert on every country's renewable energy because everything is so different and specific, and it's driven by different factors, and there's different kind of entities involved. So I'm learning a lot myself, and what my role is really to connect all these different parties and make people more broadly aware how prominent renewables is on a global basis. But it's hard to be a global expert because everything is so unique and different, but it's a great opportunity to learn. I think that globalization is only going to continue. And so to be able to be connected to it, in my role, I feel I'm very fortunate.
Oh, absolutely. And I think any opportunity to work across different cultures and to truly experience them, as you described in the Netherlands, makes an experience so much more rich than, just staying in a fairly homogenized, fancy five-star hotel and not really getting into the culture. I think exactly. Any experience is much richer along those lines. Exactly. So you've been to Australia, Marlene. Tell me, what's the one thing that you don't understand about Australia or Australians?
Okay. So a beautiful place, a long way for me to go to get there, but I loved it. I had a chance to be in Sydney and then South Adelaide. Okay. I think the one thing first of all, people are very nice. For the most part, food is fantastic. What I don't understand is Vegemite, and people actually liking Vegemite. I'm very open to trying new things. I've tried it, and I don't understand it. So
I think that's really interesting. Each time I've come to the States from Australia to stay with family, I bring Vegemite across, and have always over many years shrieked in delight with the screwed up faces as people as people try it. It's really interesting. Yes. I was speaking to a friend who has just spent an Australian friend who's just spent some time in Japan and did a cooking school in an old Japanese lady's house, and they were given a number of miso soup pastes to try from quite a sort of bland, neutral one through to a very fermented one. And there are about 6 or 8 people in the class from a range of nationalities, and she said that the Australians really favoured the very strong fermented, whereas the Americans preferred the much gentler flavour. And she ended up saying to them, well, you know what, that's because you like Vegemite, you Australians, you're familiar with this flavour. So I think that's good. I actually have a tube of it here, Marlene. I might send it to you afterwards with some instructions as to how to consume. I think one mistake people make is putting much too much on. So
maybe I haven't had the proper proper guidance. So I'll be open to trying it again, Katie.
Fabulous. I'll send it. I'll send it to you with some strict instructions as to how to try that, and I'll look forward to hearing back.
Okay.
Sounds great,
Okay.
Marlene. I'm interested to know, what advice would you give to your 10-year-old self?
Mm-hmm. So that's a good question. I guess one thing I would say is don't sweat the small stuff. I think I was the type of person who worried about some small things, or I worried about things that, if I really thought about it, ended up being irrelevant. And I know that's hard, because sometimes when you're younger and as you grow and you develop and you go through college and you go through your 20s, some things seem so instrumental, they seem so, kind of earth-shattering.
Sure.
But in the end, they don't always they're not as critical as you expect. And so sometimes I think I wish I had told myself, take a deep breath, don't get too worried, put everything in context. And, I think I would have kind of enjoyed situations more and not got so stressed out about, homework in high school, or certain, things in college, or even when I first started my career at Deloitte.
Sure. Are you, and how would you say, a few years on from your 10-year-old self now, do you have that down pat a whole lot better?
I've been focusing on it, yes. I mean, in some instances, I think I get caught up in that.
Yes.
And it's interesting because I have 11, my older son is 11, and I see kind of some of those same tendencies in him. So sometimes it is hard, though, I think to step back and take a deep breath, but I've, been really pushing myself to do that.
I hear you. I do that with my 10-year-old daughter a lot. I see her doing some of those things, and
Yeah.
Although they can't always learn from our mistakes, I'm trying to have lots of conversations with her on that front. I think life would be a whole lot sweeter with that handled better, certainly from my perspective.
Yes.
Now, I feel that you have somewhat talked about this already, perhaps, Marlene, but tell me, what has been the biggest turning point in your career?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there are two, and actually they're ones that I haven't necessarily kind of touched on before in my introduction. One of which was when I was a manager. The partner that I worked for at Deloitte sat me down and said to me, he said, I think you've got a great work ethic, you're smart, you've got a great personality. I think you could be a partner here at Deloitte. And I was really kind of taken aback, because I hadn't thought of myself in that way. I was just kind of going from associate to senior associate to manager, kind of going up, but I didn't really think about that longer term goal. And to have someone who expressed confidence in me and was supporting me and made me think kind of more longer term was fabulous. And so that was very important to me. And that person was definitely a sponsor to me and helped me throughout my career. And then actually, although not renewable energy leadership roles, but I was asked at one point to be a lead client service partner for a power and utility client in the US, and I'm still in that role. And what that role is leading Deloitte's relationship with that client, bringing all of Deloitte to that client. And I hadn't thought of myself in that role. Sometimes when you're evaluation or modeling professional, you're not always dealing with all the C-suite, and that role would have, requires a lot of interaction with the C-suite, talking with individuals across the organization, whether you have experience in that area or not, like IT. And so I was kind of taken aback when I was asked to take on that role. But again, someone who I've worked with and known for years said, Marlene, I definitely think you can do it. And I jumped at that chance, and it's been fabulous. It's really challenged me in different ways. Mm-hmm. And I've grown and developed in different ways, which I think have helped me then in my leadership role as U.S. and global renewable energy leader. So I was able to use it as a stepping stone, but it was me stepping out of my comfort zone, someone giving me an opportunity that I didn't even envision for myself. And I've been able to grow and develop professionally and personally from that role.
The importance of having sponsors and mentors and people who will push and steer us, I think, is really important. Have you learned from those in the sense of taking a step back from your day job periodically and thinking about what the next steps might be?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that I didn't do for early on in my career. And so to step back and say, okay, well, here I am now. What can I do next, or what do I want to do next?
Sure.
Learning about the fact that you do need sponsors, and you need more than one sponsor, right? You need sponsors in different areas of your organization. You need different types of mentors that you can connect with and learn from. But certainly the fact that you should take time, think about what you want to do, think about what goals you want to achieve, as opposed to just being in the here and now. Definitely a valuable lesson I've learned from my sponsors, some of which who are no longer at Deloitte, but I'm still connected to because they have been so valuable.
Sure. I'm really interested in that notion of creating space and time to step back out of busy lives and think about what the medium to long-term goal is. Do you think, I mean, this is, I guess, asking a bit of a sweeping statement, but do you think that people are good at doing that on the whole, or is it, I mean, my observation is that a lot of people just don't do much of that. I mean, what are your thoughts?
No, I don't think people do much of it. And I don't think in some cases, not everybody's encouraged to do it either.
Sure.
It's just, okay, you've got to respond to client needs. You have to, get this done, get, ABC done. And so I think one good thing at Deloitte is now instead of just doing goals for a year, I mean, some of our goals are set for a year-long period, but at my level now, we're also encouraged to do longer-term goals, because they realize some goals surpass a year and you really need 2 or 3 years. And so I think to make that shift, more so for partners, principals, managing directors, I hope they'll start doing that, for more of our staff level, because I think it is important and it makes you reflect at that time. But I think in general, it doesn't happen on a regular basis, and I think people just get caught in the here and now.
Yeah, I think you're right. I have lots of conversations with partners around that when we're talking about personal branding and eminence and the importance of just stepping back, and even if it is for a 12-month period, thinking about what you want to achieve, and perhaps setting a goal of even quarterly writing a blog or speaking publicly. Not especially onerous if you do one every 3 months, but if you don't take that time to sit down and think about it, then it just so often doesn't happen.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one that we could talk about all day. But I have a few more questions for you, Marlene. Yeah. Is there any one thing that you would change about the business environment of today?
I feel that in some cases it's getting, it's too electronic. We oftentimes we're not necessarily face-to-face with our clients. We're more prone to send an email versus pick up a phone. And I feel like in some cases that it takes more time. It creates opportunity for miscommunication, and it doesn't create as much bonding and relationship. And now sometimes it is very difficult because, you may work with somebody in another country or across country from you, but at least picking up a phone and speaking to someone does a lot more than sending an instant message or an email. And so I oftentimes am encouraging my team, okay, send an email, but just be brief and say, can we jump on the phone to discuss it in more detail? Because I can guarantee you're not going to be able to capture the essence of what you want to communicate in an email. and you're just going to be spending time going back and forth. And so I really push that with them. I really try to instill in them the personal connection that can even happen on a phone versus any other instance is much stronger. So it's a challenge, and I know it. Time differences and time zones also create a challenge, but I really try to push for that.
I think you're right. And what's your thought, just delving into that a little bit further, around the increase in meetings happening remotely rather than people coming together? I mean, obviously, much more significant from a cost saving perspective, but in terms of those side conversations and the bonding and the networking and connecting.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think there's I think you're right that sometimes. I think some cases, if it's group that's well known and they're touching base on something, to do it through video conference works out. But I think if you're trying to really achieve something and get people connected, you can't replace a live meeting. Video conference, again, does at least connect people more. Yes. But you have two different groups, or you have three different groups, right? As opposed to having one group.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting distinction, and one we're grappling with regularly.
Yes. Believe me. Yeah, I understand. It's the same thing for us. Yes. Yeah.
I bet. Marlene, what might people not know about you?
Okay, so I was thinking about this, and something that's a little bit, we thought was unusual at the time is I actually have three sisters. So my parents have four daughters. And so years ago, this was actually, I think, when I was at Deloitte. So this was after I had, graduated from, my MBA and all that. My dad entered us into the game of Family Feud, and he wanted us to audition for Family Feud.
Okay.
And I forget who the host was at that point, but he thought it would be unique with a dad showing up with four daughters. So my sisters and my dad drove down from Massachusetts because that's where they lived, and I was in New York. So we met up and we made it past the first round. Now, we weren't very unique. There were lots of families there, like a dad with four daughters or a mom with four sons. We made it past the first round, but then my sisters were like, we're not driving there and back in one day. Doing the audition is a very long day. We're like, let's not go forward with it. I think my dad is still upset that we never went forward with it. But I could have been on, national TV, being kissed by some host on Family Feud, but it didn't work out.
Oh, Marlene, how different your life could have been.
I know. I could have ended up being a reality TV star, maybe.
Oh man, and we'd never be having this conversation. I like it. Do you think that that's something that you'll do with your family to give your dad some glory years on?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think I could convince my husband to do something like that. I would probably be game for it, but.
I like it. Well, I think really it's about getting to know people and understanding, not just understanding them, not just in a business context, but having all of the richness of stories like this. That's fantastic. Now, it sort of leads on to the next question, and it's a difficult one to answer, but I'm interested to understand whether you learn more from success or failure.
Oh, do I learn more from success? I mean, I really think I learn more from failure. I think what that makes me do more often is step back and say, okay, well, what happened? What could we have done differently? How did we need to look at something differently? Was it me? Was it the team? Is it the client? Whatever it was. I think sometimes when we have success, we kind of check the box and we move on, and then we don't often say, well, why were we successful? what made the difference? And I think you, again, just check the box and you go on your merry way with a success. So I think from my perspective, failure is more important. It makes me, I reflect on things more, because I tend to also beat myself up a little bit. So that's probably why I reflect on it more and say, okay, what should we have done differently, or what should I have done differently?
I think that's a really interesting point. And I think that ability to step back and have the painful review and conversations and learn is definitely very fruitful. Are there any significant challenges that you've navigated in your career that you've drawn particular strength or insight from that you'd like to share?
That's a good question. I think one of the challenges was when I was doing all of the work, as I mentioned originally, around that cross-border lease transaction work. We had a lot of clients we worked with in that space, and we had large projects, and it was a very steady flow. And then, the IRS came in and shut that down. I had to really retool and remake myself. Now I had a base to work with, but I had to step back and say, okay, what do I do now? I have skill set, I have knowledge. How can I utilize that to reframe myself and continue my success? And so I think that was the first time I had such a drastic shift I had to undertake. And I don't think I've actually had one as dramatic as that. So that was one, but it was, good thing is I wasn't doing it alone. There were others with me. And so we had to, step back and say, okay, well, how can we take our skill set in the US market? What can we do? But it really was, a real shift to develop new relationships, and create relationships to be able to grow and basically grow a new business.
Gee, that's really interesting. I mean, it reminds me of a time about 12 or 13 years ago when I first came across LinkedIn, and I thought, oh, look, that looks interesting, but I'm too busy. I don't have time to learn that. I'm just going to dismiss it. And, I very quickly realized the error in my way. And I mean, although a much smaller example compared to the entire focus of your career, like you're talking about, it really does reinforce to me the importance of staying relevant and up to date and being self-driven and pushing yourself, because, you very quickly can become outdated, or, well, I guess even more significantly for you in that case. Really interesting.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think I look at the same way with kind of the mix of generation in the U.S., right? When I started doing work in the U.S., it was fossil-fired plants, right? I was doing coal plants and gas plants, and a lot of them were changing hands, and they were that was the market. And then 12 years ago, someone said, oh, here's a wind farm. Can you do it? And I said, well, I haven't done it before, but let me try it. And I'm glad I did, because as I mentioned, the mix and the portfolio has really changed. And I feel like I was fortunate to get in at the right time to really be able to have a lot of experience when the market really started opening up and becoming more prominent. So you do have to be open to new ideas, think about things differently, because you never know what will make you relevant or keep you relevant or make you irrelevant, right? Yeah. It doesn't mean you have to be completely scattered, but you need to have different touch points and connections.
You do. And, if you look at that pivot with the example of renewables, it's, well, many would not have predicted it 10, 15 years ago.
No. No one, and I'm not saying I did either, believe me, but I said, let me do it. It'll be fun. It'll be different. So I was not looking into a crystal ball, believe me, at that time, but I'm glad I jumped on it.
Oh, well, we could keep that between ourselves, Marlene. I think you're onto a good thing.
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So building on that a little bit, what does career nirvana look like for you?
Oh, career nirvana. Wow. That's a great question. I like variety. So in essence, I do my work in valuation, and that's in renewables. I have my leadership roles in renewables, which may allow me to bring people together, run a conference, put thought leadership out there, be interviewed, by the press, and also my role, as I mentioned, as lead client service partner. To me, that's really kind of an ideal mix for me because I'm being challenged in different ways in those roles. But ultimately, I would want to continue to be a leader around renewables and be very active in renewable energy. It's very important to me when I look at renewable energy and what it means to the environment, what it means to communities. And so I never want to, at this point, lose my touch with renewable energy because I feel very strongly about it. And I understand the importance of it. Now, my role within renewable energy could change over time, and I would be fine with that. Mm-hmm. But I don't want to lose connection with that. And also, I don't want to lose connection with people. I can't be sitting behind a desk all the time, just crunching numbers. I'm more of a people person, talking to people, interacting with them, and being able to bring, broader solutions even beyond valuation. So I think those two are key: renewable energy, and then working with people in a broader sense of helping them or a company, people or company, kind of solve their problems and change how they look at things in the market.
Sounds like a great mix. I share that in terms of getting a lot of energy from working with other people and tricky problems and working on projects and in areas that I'm deeply passionate about. I think we're lucky to be able to do that, but equally take a massive amount of pleasure and energy from it.
Yes.
Now we have a few fun questions to close out. Marlene, tell me your favorite song and why.
Okay, so I'm going to disappoint you because I can't think of one song. That's my problem. But what I'd like to say is, and I know this is maybe a little odd, is I really love disco music and I love 70s music. So,
that's not odd. It's fabulous.
It's fun. It's a great variety. I love to dance. So, if I think about favorite bands, like I love Donna Summer, I love the Bee Gees.
Yeah.
But that's really my venue of music. Today sometimes, it's not like I don't love current music or I didn't like 80s or 90s music. But for me, I love to have the 70s channel on in my car to listen to that music.
I like it. That sounds great. Now tell me.
That's from when I was growing up. My parents had an 8-track tape player, and we did have Saturday Night Fever, and we did have Donna Summer. So maybe that's why that's still in my brain.
I love it. So. Oh, that sounds excellent. Tell me, if you could invite 3 guests, living or not, for dinner, who would they be?
Yeah. Okay, so this one was, I have to say this was difficult, but what I've narrowed it down is I would love to be able to sit with my father's parents, both of which died when I was fairly young, just to ask them more about when they were growing up, when their families immigrated, what was it like? Okay. I feel like, I have my dad's been great and done my family history, and he's done all this research, but to actually physically talk to them about what the struggles they went through, how did they feel about, moving to a new place and growing up at the time they did. I think that would be really interesting. And then the other person I have to say, would be Oprah Winfrey. And the reason is she's met so many people.
She has.
And I'm sure she has such fabulous stories. And she seems like she'd be so much fun and down to earth. So I would just use her as a venue to ask about lots of different people and different experiences she's had, because I think she's had such a wide variety that I would just learn a lot and enjoy my time with her. So two very different perspectives.
Oh, I like it. Well, as I sit here in Chicago speaking to you, long time home of Oprah, I like that connection. I also think the story of how she built up a great career from what I understand was a really underprivileged background is incredibly inspiring as well.
Well, exactly, and being a minority, right? There weren't many people like her, I think, to use as when she was growing up to use as a role model. So I think you're definitely right on that part as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And Marlene, what's the best piece of business advice you have ever been given?
Yeah, I think one of them is you need to really toot your own horn and highlight your own accomplishments. I think sometimes, and I don't know if this is more of a female thing or maybe a generational thing, but sometimes I feel like we assume, well, people will know what I did. They'll remember that.
Yep.
And that's not the case. And so we need to be out there saying, hey, don't forget, this is exactly what I did. This is the value it added.
Yes.
This is how versatile I am. And I think oftentimes we don't do that. And I think it's more of a female thing. And maybe I'm wrong.
No, I agree with you.
We don't do it enough. And so therefore we kind of, I think, get marginalized, or we're not really recognized for everything we do. And shame on us. We should, we're not bragging. We're simply saying what we did, but sometimes that's hard.
Yeah, it is hard. I am pushing myself heavily out of my comfort zone to get better at doing that, but it's not something that I do innately or comfortably or naturally.
Right, exactly.
Okay. And Marlene, the final question that I would like to ask you is whether you have any career advice for listeners out there.
Okay. Well, I think I'm a little bit rare because I can tell when I interview some prospective new hires who are graduating from undergrad or when they're graduating from maybe grad school, and I talk about how long I've been at Deloitte in my career. I think their eyes get big and they think, oh my gosh, how could you, you stayed at someplace 23 years.
Sure.
What I would say is, and I think sometimes the tendency now is to, not like something about a job and want to quickly move. I guess I would say to someone, it's really important to like the people you work with. You're not going to like everybody, but you need to like that culture. You need to like the people because you're with them so much of the time. Mm-hmm. And second is not every day or every week or every month is going to be fabulous, right? There are going to be ups and downs. But you learn from those ups and downs. It makes you stronger. You learn about yourself. And, when you have the ability, to develop a great network and you get opportunities with an organization, as you evolve and you change, nothing can replace that. And so I guess I would like people to be a little bit more patient. And understand, the importance of the fact that you should like the people you're working with. Those are two very important things.
You're right. I think culture is so important. And, if I think back to some of the lessons that you talked about earlier when you had to sponsors or senior people within the firm pull you aside and say, hey, listen, I've identified some great potential in you.
Right.
I think part of that is longevity or some solid time at an organization to be able to build those relationships and for people to see you and to develop those deep connections. And that doesn't happen immediately.
No, it doesn't. And I think about when I had a couple of jobs, as I mentioned, in engineering, and, I didn't think I realized it at the time, but I think what I realized afterward is I didn't really like the culture of those organizations. I didn't feel connected. I didn't feel like I was part of a broader team, and that this is someplace, I would want to grow and develop. When I came to Deloitte, it was a very different, and I haven't really lost that connection or that feeling, even heading into my, 23rd year.
Which is wonderful, and I felt the same way when I joined Deloitte. I thought I can have all of my energy on display here. I had come from a slightly more conservative background where I needed to just tamp down my true energy and enthusiasm, and I just love that I can bring all of that to work.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's probably the same way too. I'm more of an A-type personality, and the engineering environments I were in, didn't really support that or encourage that.
Sure. Yes.
So it's great, and I really like the people that I work with and that I deal with, really more from an industry perspective. We're connected because we are involved in renewable energy. We're involved in power and utilities. And we have that connection, and I wouldn't have met them otherwise.
Yes.
But they're people that I enjoy being with, that I trust, and that makes a big difference.
It makes a massive difference, that connection, I think, absolutely. Well, Marlene, I've really enjoyed speaking to you today. You've had a number of really interesting thoughts and discussions, which I am keen to go away and reflect on, and I know that listeners are going to really enjoy this as well. So thank you very much. I'm really grateful for your time.
Well, Katie, thanks for the opportunity. This was a lot of fun. I think you asked me some questions that made me really think and reflect on things. So, it's always valuable to be able to do that. So I appreciate it. And thank you so much. I really enjoyed getting to know you as well. And, again, that's part of being at Deloitte. I get to meet new people, and I feel very fortunate that I've been able to connect with you.
Ah, wonderful. Thanks so much, Marlene. Me too.